Does it have to be true that if you're going to move forward, some people are going to have to get off the bus because they only got you as far as they could take you, and now you need new people to take you further? That may be true. What does that mean in organizing yourself? And does that have to be true? Is there a way to keep people on the bus? Is there a way to help people go through that process of their change? Is it just a realignment of who they are in the organization? And of course, you're already considering these things. But imagine what it looks like when you simplify it and make it all about the values of how you're moving forward, and consider changing the distance between where you are now and where that changes. And what are those things that need to happen that are going to make the biggest difference?
Hey everybody, Jeff here. Before we get started, if you're getting value from the podcast, please take a moment to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. For those of you listening on podcast apps, don't forget to rate and review. Your support really helps the show reach more people, and for that, I am truly grateful. Now let's dive in.
Hello and welcome to The Point. This week, the journey is to discuss and discover and consider what's happening in your inner landscape with all your different parts and how that compares to the landscape of your company or your organization, the organization you work in or that you lead. What forward movement looks like in both of those landscapes, and how they're innately similar, and how one relates to the other, and maybe even how they're a little bit different, certainly different in their physical structure, right? So what could we learn from those two viewpoints and from those two perspectives, looking at your inner landscape and you moving forward in your whole self, and an organization moving forward? So you are an owner, you are a CEO, you are a boss, you are leveled up and moving forward and watching for any obstacle coming your way, where you're deploying every resource you can at the solution. You might be safe, you might be reserved, you might be a maverick and a risk taker, and you might be all of those things at once. But what you do know is that you're moving forward and that you will win. In recent months, a lot has been discussed and come up around the discussion of how to move forward the fastest. And the one thing that's consistent amongst all growth experts, amongst all people who have led and moved forward powerfully, is that alignment is key. If all parties aren't aligned, it is slower. There's things that get in the way. So that's true for boards and organizations that have a board of directors that need to find ways to move forward. It's considering, okay, who's going to do something that's going to stop us? And what attitude, mindset, or belief system is going to slow us down or keep this from happening? And gaining buy-in and getting votes and moving is critical to moving forward. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's go. The real point of today is to consider, why not move forward? One of the things that's different in many organizations when initially engaging is a conversation about the function of growth and the function of what's needed to move forward, and all of those many pieces that are there. And it doesn't always make sense to when you consider what it is, the one most important thing to move forward and to get the most bang for the buck to get forward, doesn't always make sense in our minds based on what we're thinking. And there's a concept to realize that's very important. The concept to realize is that if you already knew what you needed to know to move forward, you'd be forward. So what you don't know is what is typically the obstacle. And sometimes the difference between where you are today and getting to where you want to be today is either something that you hadn't considered or something that you've been unwilling to consider or didn't make sense to consider to you. So something you might not even be willing to do. A great example is if you're trying to move an organization forward and you need alignment, and it needs alignment from a lower level in the company. It's not just an executive alignment. You need directors, vice presidents, directors, managers, and even sole contributors all aligned towards a goal, because it takes everyone's effort to do things from a certain perspective. If you need that and you're wanting to move forward and you're not able to inspire the ranks of the people actually getting the jobs done, how do you gain that? And There's a lot of functional training and other pieces that you might think come into play, but oftentimes the number one thing that's missing is something about a way to manage performance. And oftentimes we're managing performance from a place of what's not working and only focusing on what's not working. One of the most critical things any growth oriented company can do is to shift out of these fixing what's broken type of performance management processes and programs and move 100% over into a development process where every employee is moving forward from a perspective of how they're developing their career, their lives, their processes, their routines, and all of the things that lead into them being successful and having wins. Start looking at what's working really well and maximizing those things versus what's not working, and then correcting that through corrective actions. Most people don't love having corrective active conversations. One of the best visuals to think about how this flips upside down is in entry level types of jobs. That I've ever met has had an entry level job at some point. And there's clearly a few exceptions to that. But as a norm, most people have had an entry level job. So their first job ever has happened for most people. And in that first job, attendance and tardiness is something that gets approached. And having worked in retail and having worked in restaurant, and I've been exposed to a lot of those types of conversations where running a shift, anytime you're in a situation where you're running a shift and being on time for that shift is critical, you have an issue of attendance. And it's very simple. Many people oftentimes completely ignore the idea of writing someone up or documenting that they were late until they've been late so many times that you have to do it. So there's a question: what is the resistance internally to wanting to write that up, to wanting to document that? Oh, I don't want to. And it's usually coming from a good place, a place of kindness. So the illustration is to flip the script and say, wait a minute, if this person is really that critical, if it's true that they need to be there on time, and if I don't want to lose that person from the team, I better make it clear fast that this isn't acceptable and figure out a way to help this person get it right. I have a belief system that says that they either need to figure it out or not. Whatever that belief system is, at the end of the day, what is the result you want? The result you want is you want them there on time without issue and understanding what they need to do and doing their job well. It's typically simple, not that it's simple when you're sitting there in the problem going, I don't want this person to feel the way that they are going to feel when I document this. But if we can turn that and authentically say and authentically create the environment where we're saying to somebody, look, you're too critical and too important to lose you over something like tardiness. So I'm going to document this so that you understand. I'm going to take my time and invest it in you to make sure it's clear to you the importance of this so that you no longer have the challenge. Oftentimes, that's all it takes, and handling it quick and steady and getting it documented is all it takes. The second, third, fourth time, as you've allowed a behavior without any type of warning or without any type of consequence other than, hey, you can't do that. Don't put me in that position or whatever, those pleas, if those aren't working, it's as a responsibility of a leader, it's because you haven't set the line. So you have to have clear, defined lines. Now that fits. So we're going to move past that. That's a pretty simple illustration of how we can flip something quickly from what we believe to how what we believe is good in intention, but not necessarily getting you the result you want. So back to this part of inner alignment, right? In that situation, there is not alignment towards what you want, hoping you get what you want if you could do the minimal effort, right? So how's that happening in other parts of an organization? And how's that different internally versus externally when you're working with a team? Internally, you might be doing the same thing. And how to get all of your parts moving forward, right? Listening to some type of a clip somewhere of one of these gurus that has amazingly cool things to say sometimes. And I'm forgetting the name of the guru, but I can visualize him with his clothes and his long beard and his gray hair. And he was saying, be careful of parts, be careful of the parts work that you're doing in the world. There's IFS, the internal family systems, and these other things that are about parts work. He was putting a warning out that be careful of when you're doing parts, that you don't start to blame and consider a part of yourself for doing something, because that's called schizophrenia. as we go through these types of ideas, it's easy to walk into an organization that's highly professional and say, man, don't give me the, and that feels foo-fooey to talk about parts and talk about alignment. So this is where we get to look at where can we benefit from both views. And for sure, when you're working in an organization, it's simple to say, I need everyone aligned. I need everyone moving forward, and getting people aligned to what the values are and how to demonstrate the values in their actual job could be different from what it looks like to demonstrate those values in their mindset of what they think that value means in the real world, in their life, in other situations, and in their family or in other organizations they're involved in. Defining a value within an organization and then understanding how each level of that organization demonstrates that value keeps us moving forward and gets much faster, farther growth. Internally, if we're trying to change a habit and we don't want to eat sugar anymore, or we don't want to dip tobacco or use any type of tobacco or nicotine, or we don't want to vape, or we don't want to use, or we want to limit our screen time on your phone. Like, you want to change one of your behaviors that you're in the middle of that doesn't work for you. And, you can address that behavior over and over and not get as much growth because you're not considering what part of you is benefiting from that behavior. It's the only break I get to sit and look at my phone and spend 15, 20 minutes on my phone. What could you be doing differently with that time? What you're gaining on one hand is important to your psyche, important somewhere inside of you. And whereas the other thing is leaning on some other part of you that doesn't want that to spend that energy in that moment or something else. So there's this inner battle. And if you're addressing it from the behavior, you're very far away from the actual solution, because the solution is looking at what parts of you, what's the point of view that you have inside that says, oh, it's the only break I have that I got to use. That's the best time I have just to relax, versus the part of you that says, no, I want to use this time better. I want to meditate during that time. I want to change the level of awareness I have in my, in the environment. I want to journal during that time. Something that makes more sense to you. Go for a walk, get some steps. It's what part of you doesn't want to do that, even though you say you should. So getting those parts of yourself together is how you move forward. In an organization, if you're in a similar place where you're chasing some other type of event, we were looking for ways to grow the company. And one of the biggest gains we had was in a simple change of behavior and a simple change of a configuration of how something was packaged. Because we gained it by looking at the behavior of the people, but also the behavior of the packaging through the whole system. And we changed something from having 6 per case and 21 on a pallet to 8 per case and 56 cases on a pallet, and completely changed the amount of costs of this product to get to the end user who was using it in the manufacturing process, and absolutely benefited. And each one of the SKUs, there were 4 different variations of the SKU, went over $1 million. So it went from a total of $500,000 worth of sales to one of the products went over 2 million and the other 3 went over 1 million. So you hear the growth. You hear from 500,000 to over 5 million in sales in a matter of months, just based on changing the packaging and making this item more available. And we stopped chasing the behavior of how do we keep these cases from damaging? How do we keep this? And as we were looking at trucking and looking at how the client was using the product and all of the other things that we were looking at, we were focusing on those external behaviors. But when we brought it back down into, what the real issue was, and we got everyone aligned, but to get the purchasing involved, they didn't want to jump through a bunch of hoops, and the box, to redo the warehouse and figure out where to put these boxes. And it was almost like, when you look back now from a 50,000 mile view and look down on this problem, it almost looks like the people in the organization didn't want to grow, because that was the only thing that was needed for this company to grow and overnight go from They overnight just adding 5.5, 6 million. They added 3 shifts. They added a new building. They added all these things to accommodate this level of manufacturing, and then continued to add other line items and grow by changing the model of how they were looking at things, by including more people in these conversations, of looking at the behaviors of things and not staying in the behavior, but coming back and looking at all the parts and looking at the root causes and actually bringing some solutions. Now, when you compare that to thinking about what's the next best thing that I could do that makes the biggest difference to the greater good of all things moving forward, it's very similar to then why, if I'm in an organization where it's very function based and I have, you know, 6, 7, 8 different teams, right? Some doing contracts and some doing sales and some doing, data and some, doing organizational management and some, all of the different tasks that need to be performed within an organization. And to look at, wait a minute, why do I need to slow down and start looking at every job function and look at the values of the organization and get everyone on the same page with how they're behaving? The behaviors change when the value change. So rather than chasing all of these behaviors and being in a performance management process where we're only worried about how people aren't doing well, which keeps that conversation back in the attendance game of only talk about it when you absolutely have to, when it's gotten bad enough that now you have to do it, because every conversation's negative, versus shifting it to where every conversation's positive. Then what if you're doing that again for yourself internally? So as a CEO, as a boss, as an owner, right, as a leader, to look in the mirror and begin to have these conversations of what parts of us want to move forward and don't, translate very well then to how you look at your organization and begin to understand and have some compassion and gain and have a reason to want to learn more, where you might otherwise say they just need to get on the bus or get off. They just need to get it done or not. These are the critical things that need to happen to move us forward. If we're looking at the behaviors we need to add that we believe are going to get us forward with our old thinking that doesn't match the new thinking that we'd have once we've changed, we are immediately in inner conflict. And we are immediately in a conflict that won't help you move forward. So if you don't know what you don't know now, how are you going to open up your mind and your understanding of things to now understand the problems you're going to have? And there's a lot of keys and tactics that we are here to talk about as we go through this year and consider that will help you unlock and open these ideas. But again, if you already knew what it was going to take to get you to the next level, you'd do it. And it's usually in something you aren't considering or have considered and aren't willing to do. How do we set aside everything that we think we know and set aside everything that we are sure we know to consider something new? So a question that comes up in this is about time, space, and distance. If you think about what distance, a really key question that comes up when you're thinking functionally of these are all the things that need to happen for us to move forward. If you're thinking that way and you're very functional in all of that, in all of that thought, there's a question of how many of those functions won't need to be considered if you think of it a little bit differently, right? Because there's this question of who we're going to become, who we're wanting to be in our new identity, right? Because if you're the owner of a 20 or $30 million company and you want to become a $200 million company or more, you want to increase and completely blow open the doors of what you know, there's an entirely different way of thinking. If you're in a small business doing $1 million, $2 million, $3 million a year, and you're wanting to become a 10, 12, $15 million a year company, right? You're hitting a zone where it seems like it's easier to have less revenue because you personally make more money. Your profitability is better. That's because you're using an old thought process to manage new ideas. How do you then, right? The question becomes what's necessary for you is to begin to consider what you're not considering that is that bigger question, right? So there's this idea of this time, distance, and space between who I am today and who we're becoming and who I'm becoming, whether that's for me or my organization. So what I don't know is what I'm going to need to move forward and what I haven't considered. So, one of the things that's going to get in our way is doubt and discouragement. But this crux of thinking about this that is really important to consider before we wrap this. The point of this entire episode is to realize that if you're in the process of making a decision of investing, maybe you're considering financing for your business to move it forward, changing your line of credit or getting a different line of credit for a new area, or maybe you're considering some major leadership change or an entire change of structure of how you're moving forward, or you're just looking at adding resources and making some investments, whatever that decision is that you're holding back from. If you're thinking in, if you have the mindset and the wherewithal to go ahead and push yourself forward into a new consideration, and if you're moving forward in what you're trying to achieve, and then when you sit down and think about the decision you're making to try and make the decision, and you go back into your old way of thinking and structure to make this decision, there can be a problem. So if you feel stuck or frozen in a decision process, this is where you get to think about what is the next best thing I can do to affect all things. But it's also where you can realize that what it takes to move forward is different from what it took to get you where you are. And if you begin to lean on old strategies of how you made decisions, that may or may not be the best way of doing it, especially if you're coming from a place of a limiting belief that is specifically limiting to your future growth. It may have been groundbreaking and actually revolutionary how you thought of it a year, 2 years ago when you made another decision. But today, based on where you're going tomorrow, based on this new place, if you're on a constant growth upward, it will take it will take something very different in your considerations. So, how do you then see that and forethink that? Great example is talking to a client about investing in themselves. They've been working very hard for a long time, developing these systems and processes to step out on their own and do their own company. And you can hear the fears and limitations of shifting from that place of being in a safe corporate environment, escalating and making things happen. And you could tell they were amazing at their craft and what they did, but they were sitting there looking at moving forward. And imagine yourself thinking about moving forward out of a very safe environment where everything's taken care of, and you're making 500,000 a year, and you're busy and there's not much of a way to add to your life. Maybe you're making more than that and you're now considering moving out on your own, and you've saved and you've done all that you need to get ready. And then in considering what you need, what are the resources that are needed to move forward, and you begin to evaluate that from the same way you were taught by your dad to make a decision. Imagine making these decisions the way your dad taught you to make decisions. And your dad was a safe corporate guy that didn't take much risk as far as moving out. And he believed that the best way to move forward in life was to have a safe job that paid you a lot of money and create savings. But he didn't have a vision and a reason to step forward and want to create the same thing. Because in that mode, you're not thinking of creating the same thing you were doing necessarily. You're thinking of creating what the company you were working for created. It's an entirely different identity of thought and an identity of process. Whether or not you have investors or whether or not you get a loan, and the concept of, am I doing it on my own, even means something entirely different. So if imagine yourself thinking about how to move forward, and your consideration is that you're valuing wanting to do something on your own. You're wanting to do it within your own framework. And that may or may not be the best move based on what you're actually trying to create. However, it's not that doing it on your own doesn't work. It's all the things you think that means based on your history and your perspective. That's that unique part of you. And then if you take your perspective and consider that, gain the awareness, and then move that into the approach. And what approach are you going to take to move forward? And the approach may change. based on what you're valuing as a result. Considering today for yourself, what are the similarities and differences between how you can engage yourself in a process of change and growth, how you can also engage a company, and how they're similar in parts? It might help you create some ways of identifying parts of you in a metaphorical way of considering the same types of parts in an organization. The accountant in your mind has one way of wanting to do things, and the coach, and the father, and all of these parts of you, or the mother, and all of the things that have how you want to move forward, right? And how they relate to the same thing in an organization. There is a simple, understandable, definable way of moving forward through the change process that is the same based on the heartbeat of an organization, which can be how you're organized as an individual or how a company or a group is organized. And sometimes gaining clarity on that, not even sometimes, gaining clarity on what those similarities are, make you more intimately aware and makes it more personal to you to understand how change is, because in the space and time and distance between where you are now and where you want to go is a different conversation than functionally what is it going to take to get there. And if you consider what is the distance, time, space, distance between where I am now and where I want to go, or where my organization is and where they want to go, beliefs of all the people in an organization, right? And does it have to be true that if you're going to move forward, some people are going to have to get off the bus because they only got you as far as they could take you? And now you need new people to take you further. That may be true. What does that mean in organizing yourself? And does that have to be true? Is there a way to keep people on the bus? Is there a way to help people go through that process of their change? Is it just a realignment of who they are in the organization? And of course, you're already considering these things. But imagine what it looks like when you simplify it and make it all about the values of how you're moving forward, and consider changing the distance between where you are now and where that changes. And what are those things that need to happen that are going to make the biggest difference? So it's having the functional conversation and the functional layout of how things need to happen, and having this more energetic thing of time and space of what is the distance between where we are now and where we need to go, and how could we narrow that gap? That will catapult change like nothing else. It has over and over again, time and time again. And it takes some skill and some craft to see that and know how to move it. And it is absolutely scientifically based and clear as day once you see it happen. So that is the point today for you. I wish you Godspeed and good blessings in all of your considerations as you think about this. And we will see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for another amazing episode of The Point with me, Jeff Spikes. Please visit jeffspikes.com for everything you would need to know to engage with me offline. And lastly, thank you for your time, your attention, and your consideration. This is The Point.